The morning sun spilled through the windows of Cafe Allegro as Maya Bennett tied her apron around her waist. The familiar weight of it felt like putting on armor before battle. She tucked a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear and glanced at the clock, 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes to prepare before the morning rush began. "Morning, Maya," called Bernie from the kitchen. The old man's voice was rough from years of smoking, though he'd quit 5 years ago when his doctor gave him an ultimatum. His weathered hands worked quickly, prepping the grill for the breakfast. "Crowd. Morning," she replied, grabbing a rag to wipe down the already clean counters. Maya liked these quiet moments before opening, when the cafe smelled of fresh coffee and possibility, before the day's problems walked through the door. Cafe Allegro sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth, a brick building with large windows that had served the neighborhood for over 30 years. The decor hadn't changed much in that time. Wooden tables worn smooth from countless elbows, vintage posters of old jazz musicians, and in the far corner, the upright piano that gathered dust. Maya had been working here for 3 years now. At 28, she wasn't where she thought she'd be at this point in her life. Waiting tables was supposed to be temporary, something to pay the bills while she figured out her next move. Somehow temporary had stretched into years. The bell above the door jingled as Tony arrived for her shift, bringing with her the smell of cigarettes and drugstore perfume. "You're early," Maya said, surprised. Tony shrugged, her bleached blonde, hair bouncing. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I might as well make some money instead of staring at my ceiling." She grabbed an apron from the hook. "How was yesterday's closing shift?" "The usual," Maya said, though that lawyer guy left a 20% tip for once. "Miracles do happen," Tony laughed, tying her apron with practiced ease. By 7 they opened the doors, and the morning regulars trickled in. First was old Pete, who ordered the same breakfast every day, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter, and black coffee. Then came the nurses from the hospital down the street, their scrubs wrinkled from night shifts, eyes heavy with the weight of caring for others. After them, the office workers grabbing coffee to go, their faces already set in professional masks. Maya moved between tables with the grace of someone who had done this thousands of times. She didn't need to write down orders anymore. Her memory had gotten sharp from necessity. 2 chocolate chip pancakes for the kid in the blue hoodie, extra napkins for the woman who always spilled her coffee, a side of hot sauce for the quiet man by the window. "Order up," Bernie called, and Maya balanced 3 plates along her arm, delivering them to a table of construction workers who nodded their thanks. The morning passed in a blur of coffee refills, wiping tables, and the constant clinking of dishes. During a rare quiet moment, Maya found herself staring at the piano. It sat there like an old friend waiting to be acknowledged, its wood dulled by years of neglect. "You play?" Maya startled. One of the construction workers, she thought his name was Joe, was watching her. "No," she said quickly. "Just thinking it's gathering dust." Joe nodded and returned to his eggs, and Maya felt a pang of something like regret, though she wasn't sure why. The lunch rush hit like a wave, and Maya was too busy to think about anything but keeping up. Her feet ached in her sensible shoes, and sweat made her shirt stick to her back. Still, she smiled at each customer, remembering names when she could, making small talk that sounded genuine enough. "How's your mom doing, Mrs. Chen?" she asked, as she refilled the older woman's tea. Mrs. Chen smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Better, thank you for asking. The new medication is helping with her arthritis." These little connections were what made the job bearable, knowing the pieces of people's lives being a constant in their routines. Maya might just be the waitress to them, but sometimes she felt like she held together the fabric of the neighborhood, one coffee refill at a time. By mid-afternoon, the cafe quieted down. Maya wiped down tables and restocked the sugar packets, her mind drifting to her evening class. 3 nights a week after her shift ended, she attended business administration classes at the community college. It was practical, her mother had said. A degree that could lead to a steady job, benefits, security. All the things her mother had never had. "Take your break, Maya," Bernie called from behind the counter. "You've been on your feet for 6 hours straight." Maya nodded gratefully and untied her apron. She grabbed her worn paperback from beneath the counter and headed to the small table in the back corner, near the piano. It was her usual spot, partly because it was out of the way, and partly because from there she could see the entire cafe. She opened her book, a dog-eared copy of a mystery novel, but found her attention wandering. The piano seemed to be watching her, its closed lid like a question waiting to be asked. Maya couldn't remember the last time someone had played it. Years ago, the cafe had hosted music nights, local talents performing while people sipped wine, and pretended they were in some sophisticated New York club instead of a small-town cafe. But those had ended before Maya started working here. "It's still in tune," Bernie said, appearing beside her table with a fresh cup of coffee. He set it down and nodded toward the piano. "I get it tuned twice a year." Maya looked up, surprised. "Why? Nobody plays it." Bernie shrugged, his broad shoulders rising and falling beneath his stained white t-shirt. "Just in case." He hesitated, then added, "You ever want to try it, you go ahead." Before Maya could respond, he walked away, called by the ding of the kitchen bell. She stared after him, wondering what had prompted the offer. Had he noticed her looking at the piano? Was it that obvious? The afternoon shift brought in the after-school crowd, teenagers with backpacks and loud laughs ordering the cheapest items on the menu and staying for hours. Maya didn't mind them. They tipped poorly, but they were easy to please and brought life to the place. As the day wore on, Maya found herself thinking about her tiny apartment waiting for her. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with thin walls and unreliable heat, but it was hers. She had decorated it with thrift store finds and plants that somehow thrived despite her inconsistent care. Tonight, she'd microwave leftovers, review her notes, for class maybe call her mother if it wasn't too late. It was a life. Not the one she had dreamed of as a child, but a life nonetheless. "Maya, can you stay an extra hour?" Bernie asked as the clock approached 5. Lisa called in sick and the dinner rush is about to start. Maya should have said no. She had class at 7 and she needed to go home and change, maybe shower if there was time. But Bernie's face was lined with worry, and she knew he wouldn't. Ask if he wasn't desperate. "Sure," she said, retying her apron. "But I need to leave by 6 at the latest." Bernie's relief was visible. "You're a lifesaver." The dinner crowd was different from the morning regulars. Business people unwinding after work, couples on casual dates, families treating themselves to a night out. Maya moved between them all, smiling through her fatigue, the practiced phrases coming automatically. "How is everything tasting? Can I get you anything else? Would you like to see the dessert menu?" At 5:55, with just 5 minutes left of her extended shift, the bell above the door jingled, and a man in an expensive suit walked in. Maya recognized him immediately. The difficult regular who never seemed satisfied with anything. "Table for one," he said without looking at her, his eyes on his phone. Maya led him to a small table and handed him a menu, already anticipating. The complaints: the water wasn't cold enough, the lighting was too dim, the chicken was too dry. "I'll give you a minute to look over the menu," she said. "I don't need a minute. I'll have the steak medium rare with the sauce on the side and vegetables instead of potatoes. And bring me a glass of the house red." Maya nodded and took the menu. "I'll put that right in for you." She was punching the order into the system when she heard the first notes. Soft, hesitant, like someone testing the waters. She turned toward the sound. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, had lifted the piano lid and was pressing the keys one by one. Her mother, sitting at a nearby table, looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she called to Maya. "Lily, come away from there." But Maya found herself shaking her head. "It's okay," she said, surprised at her own words. "She can play if she wants." The girl, Lily, looked up with wide eyes. "Really?" Maya nodded, something tight uncoiling in her chest as she watched the child's delight. "Really?" As Lily's small fingers pressed the keys with more confidence, making no real melody but finding joy in the sounds, Maya felt something stir inside her. A memory, perhaps, or a question that had no answer. The difficult customer cleared his throat loudly, breaking the moment. "Excuse me, I'm still waiting for my wine." Maya turned away from the piano, the spell broken. But as she moved through the rest of her shift, pouring wine and delivering food, she found herself glancing back at the piano long after Lily and her mother had left. When 6 o'clock came, Maya hung up her apron and gathered her things. Imbar was going to be late for class, but for once she didn't mind. Something had shifted today, though she couldn't quite name what it was. As she walked past the piano on her way out, she paused, her fingers hovering over the keys for just a moment, before she pulled them back. Not today, she thought, but soon. Outside, the evening air was cool on her skin. Maya took a deep breath and started walking toward the bus stop, the sound of phantom piano notes following her all the way home. 3 weeks had passed since the little girl played the piano, and Maya couldn't get the sound out of her head. Those random, cheerful notes had awakened something inside her that she'd kept buried for years. Tuesday evenings were always slow at Café Allegro. The morning regulars were long gone, and the dinner crowd was sparse, mostly college students, with laptops who ordered one coffee and occupied tables for hours. Maya didn't mind. The slower pace meant she could catch her breath, and Bernie never rushed anyone out the door. "Another refill?" Maya asked a young woman surrounded by textbooks. The student looked up, dark circles under her eyes. "Please, I've got a midterm tomorrow." Maya filled her cup. "Biology?" "Organic chemistry," the student groaned. "I'm starting to see carbon bonds in my sleep." Maya laughed. "You've got this. I've seen you in here studying for weeks." The small encouragement earned her a grateful smile. These little moments made the job worthwhile, the brief connections with people passing through her life. Maya had gotten good at reading people over the years, who needed cheering up, who wanted to be left alone, who might stiffer on the tip. Speaking of which, she thought as the cafe door opened, the man who walked in wore an expensive suit that seemed to announce his importance before he did. Robert Keller, though he insisted on being called Mr. Keller, was a lawyer from the firm down the street. He came in every Tuesday, sat at the same table by the window, and made Maya's evening miserable. "Good evening, Mr. Keller," she said, leading him to his usual spot. "The usual tonight?" He barely looked up from his phone. "The steak was overcooked last time." Maya bit the inside of her cheek. "I'll make sure the kitchen knows." For the next hour she did a delicate dance, refilling water before he could complain it was empty, checking on his meal at precisely the right intervals, not too often to annoy him but enough to seem attentive, all while serving her other tables, with a smile that grew more forced as the evening wore on. By 8 o'clock the cafe had emptied except for Mr. Keller, who was lingering over his coffee and making notes on legal papers. Maya began the closing routine, wiping down tables and restocking sugar packets for the morning shift. "Miss? Check, please," Mr. Keller finally called, holding up a finger as if summoning a dog. Maya brought his bill with the same professional smile she'd maintained all evening. "I hope everything was satisfactory tonight." He looked at the bill, frowning slightly. The service was adequate. He placed his credit card on the tray without making eye contact. Adequate. The word stung more than it should have. Maya had bent over backward for this man, as she did for all her customers. What did he know about her life, her dreams, the effort it took to stand on her feet for 8 hours and still smile? She processed his payment silently, returning the credit card and receipt for him to sign. When he left, with a tip that was exactly 15% calculated to the penny, Maya let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That guy's a real piece of work," Bernie said from behind the counter. He was wiping down the espresso machine, his movements methodical after decades of the same routine. "Just doing his job, I guess," Maya said, though she didn't really believe. It being busy or important wasn't an excuse for treating people like they were invisible. Bernie snorted. "His job doesn't include making my best waitress look like she wants to cry." Maya was surprised by the compliment buried in his gruff concern. "I'm fine, really." Bernie nodded, but his eyes were knowing. "Why don't you head out early? I can finish closing up." The offer was tempting. Her feet ached and the interaction with Mr. Keller had left her feeling hollow. But Maya shook her head. "I don't mind staying. Besides, I don't have class tonight." Usually, she would have rushed home to her small apartment, maybe watched some TV before falling into bed. But tonight, the thought of her empty rooms felt more lonely than peaceful. "Suit yourself," Bernie said, disappearing into the back office with the day's receipts. Maya finished wiping down the last table, then swept the floors, the familiar motion soothing her frayed nerves. The cafe was quiet now, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street outside. In this stillness, Maya felt herself drawn once again to the piano in the corner. For weeks, she'd been careful to avoid looking at it directly as if it might call out to her. But now in the empty cafe, she found herself standing before it, her reflection ghostly in its polished wood surface. Without fully deciding to, Maya sat on the bench. It creaked slightly under her. Wait, the sound loud in the quiet room. She lifted the fallboard that covered the keys, revealing the familiar pattern of black and white that had once been as natural to her as breathing. Her hands hovered over the keys, suddenly unsure. It had been so long, 10 years since she'd played with any seriousness. Would her fingers even remember? Behind her, she heard the office door open. Maya quickly started to close the fallboard, embarrassed to be caught. "Don't stop on my account," Bernie said, his voice gentle. Maya turned, her cheeks warm. "I wasn't really going to play, just looking." Bernie leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. "That piano's been sitting there for years, collecting dust. Be nice for someone to make it sing again." Something in his tone made Maya pause. "Did you used to play?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. My wife did, though. Carol. She's the one who insisted we have live music when we opened this place." In the 3 years Maya had worked at the cafe, Bernie had rarely mentioned his late wife. She knew only the basics, that Carol had died from cancer before Maya was hired, that they had opened the cafe together in their 20s, that they never had children. "I didn't know," Maya said softly. Bernie shrugged, his eyes on the piano. She loved music, said a place without music was just a building, not a home. He cleared his throat. "Anyway, I'm heading out. You okay to lock up?" Maya nodded, accepting the keys he held out. "Good night, Bernie." He paused at the door. "You know that piano's still in tune. I get a guy to come in twice a year." With that, he was gone, the bell above the door jingling as it closed behind him. Maya sat in the resulting silence, Bernie's words echoing in her mind, still in tune. Waiting. Slowly, she placed her fingers on the keys. The cool ivory felt both foreign and familiar beneath her touch. She pressed middle C, the note ringing clear in the empty cafe. Then another note, and another, her fingers remembering a simple melody she'd learned as a child. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." The nursery song was the first thing she'd ever played, sitting on her grandmother's lap at age 4. The memory was so vivid, her grandmother's hands guiding hers, the smell of lavender and baking bread, the afternoon sun streaming through, lace curtains. Maya played the simple tune all the way through, her fingers gaining confidence with each note. When she finished, she sat still for a moment, surprised by the emotion welling up inside her. It was like finding a piece of herself she'd forgotten was missing. She began another song, one slightly more complex, a Bach minuet she'd practiced for her first recital. Her fingers stumbled at first, muscle memory battling against years of disuse. But by the third try, the melody began to take shape, flowing more naturally as her hands remembered their old patterns. Maya lost track of time as she played, moving from one half-remembered piece to another. Some came back easily, as if she'd played them yesterday. Others remained frustratingly out of reach, leaving her hands hovering uncertainly over the keys. She didn't hear the door open, didn't notice she was no longer alone, until a voice spoke behind her. That was beautiful. Maya's hands crashed down on the keys in surprise, producing a jarring discord. She spun around to find a woman standing just inside the door, one of the nurses who sometimes came in for breakfast after the night shift. I'm sorry, the woman said quickly. I didn't mean to startle you. I thought you were still open. The lights were on. We're closed, Maya said, standing up so quickly she bumped the piano bench. I mean, the kitchen's closed, but I could get you some coffee if you want. The nurse, Maya remembered her name was Diane, shook her head. No, that's okay. I was just walking by and heard the music. She smiled. I didn't know you played. I don't, Maya said automatically, then corrected herself. I mean, I used to. A long time ago. Well, you should keep at it. You're really good. The compliment made Maya uncomfortable. Thanks, but I was just messing around. Diane looked like she wanted to say more, but instead nodded. Well, sorry to interrupt. Have a good night. When she was gone, Maya closed the piano carefully, suddenly self-conscious. Had she really been playing well enough for someone to stop on the street and listen? The thought was both flattering and terrifying. Maya finished closing up, turning off lights and making sure the coffee machines were unplugged. As she locked the front door, she glanced back at the piano, now shadowy in the dimness. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would go back to being just a waitress. The piano had been a momentary distraction, nothing more. She couldn't afford to get lost in old dreams. But as she walked home through the quiet streets, Maya found herself humming the Bach minuet, her fingers twitching slightly at her sides as if still playing. And for the first time in years, she fell asleep thinking not of bills or classes or work, but of music. The next morning, Maya arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. She told herself it was to help with the breakfast prep, but the truth was, she wanted a few minutes alone with the piano before her shift started. The cafe was dark when she unlocked the door, the chairs still stacked on tables from the night before. Maya turned on just enough lights to see her way to the piano. This time she didn't hesitate before sitting down and lifting the fallboard. The melody came more easily today, her fingers finding the right keys with growing confidence. It wasn't perfect. Years of neglect had left her technique rusty, but it was music, real music flowing from her hands. I thought I heard someone come in. Maya jumped, her hands frozen above the keys. Bernie stood in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. Sorry, she said, starting to rise. I was just... Sit, Bernie said firmly. Finish your song. Maya hesitated, then slowly sank back onto the bench. Under Bernie's watchful gaze, she began to play again, this time a Chopin nocturne that had once been her favorite piece. She stumbled over the more difficult passages, wincing at the wrong notes, but kept going until the final chord faded away. When she looked up, Bernie was smiling. A rare, full smile that transformed his usually stern face. You've been holding out on me, kid, he said. Where'd you learn to play like that? Maya shrugged, suddenly shy. I took lessons when I was young. Nothing special. Bernie's eyebrows rose. Nothing special? You could have fooled me. He checked his watch. We open in 20 minutes, but tomorrow come in early again if you want. That piano's been quiet too long. As he headed back to the kitchen, Maya felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Something that felt a lot like hope. 2 weeks had passed since Maya first touched the piano keys, and now it had become part of her routine. She arrived at Dawai, the cafe 45 minutes before opening, made a pot of coffee, and played for half an hour before starting her shift. Sometimes Bernie would listen from the kitchen, pretending to be busy with prep work. Other times she had the cafe all to herself, just her and the music in the quiet morning light. She started bringing sheet music from home, old books she'd packed away years ago, thinking she'd never use them again. Her fingers were remembering more each day, muscle memory returning with practice. She still hit wrong notes, still struggled with the more challenging pieces, but there was joy in the struggle now, a satisfaction in feeling herself improve. Maya had just finished playing a Debussy piece when she looked up to find Bernie watching her, coffee mug in hand. You know, he said, we could start doing music nights again, just once a week to begin with. Maya's stomach dropped. Oh, I'm not I mean, I couldn't play for people, this is just for fun. Bernie shrugged. Suit yourself, but you've got talent, kid. Seems a shame to keep it hidden. Before Maya could respond, he headed back to the kitchen, leaving her alone. With the idea he'd planted. Play for an audience? The thought made her palms sweat. It had been 10 years since her last recital, and that memory was one she'd tried hard to forget. Later that morning, as Maya served breakfast to the regulars, she found herself studying their faces, wondering what they would think if they heard her play. Would they be surprised? Would they laugh at the idea of their waitress suddenly sitting down at the piano? More coffee, Pete? She asked, already knowing the answer would be yes. Old Pete never stopped at just one cup. Thanks, Maya, he said, holding up his mug. Say, Bernie tells me you're quite the pianist. Maya nearly spilled the coffee. Bernie said that? Pete nodded. Said you come in early to practice, used to be a music student or something? A long time ago, Maya said, uncomfortable with being the topic of conversation. It's nothing serious. Well, I'd love to hear you play sometime, Pete said. This place used to have great music nights back before Carol passed. By lunchtime, Maya realized Bernie must have told several of the regulars about her playing. Mrs. Chen asked if she knew any traditional Chinese songs. Diane, the night shift nurse who had caught her playing that first evening, wondered if the cafe would start hosting performances again. Even the college students who camped out with their laptops seemed interested in the idea of live music. You've been talking about me, Maya accused Bernie during a quiet moment between the lunch and dinner rushes. Bernie didn't even have the grace to look guilty. Just mentioned to a few folks that we might be bringing back music nights. I never agreed to that. I know. Bernie wiped his hands on a dish towel. But you should think about it. People around here could use some beauty in their lives. Music brings folks together. Maya sighed. I'm not good enough to perform, Bernie. I'm rusty, and I never was professional level to begin with. Who said anything about professional? Bernie raised an eyebrow. This is a neighborhood cafe, not Carnegie Hall. People just want something real. Something real. The phrase stuck with Maya as she finished her shift. Was that what her playing was? Something real in a life that sometimes felt like she was just going through the motions? That evening after closing, Maya found herself once again at the piano. But instead of playing, she just sat there, thinking about Bernie's words. The truth was, part of her wanted to perform again. There had been a time when she loved it, the connection with the audience, the feeling of creating something beautiful in the moment. But that was before. The bell above the door jingled, interrupting her thoughts. Maya looked up, expecting to see Bernie returning for something he'd forgotten. Instead, an elderly woman stood in the doorway, elegant despite her age, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. I'm sorry, we're closed, Maya said, standing quickly. Oh, I know, the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong. I was hoping to catch whoever was playing that lovely Debussy this morning. I live in the apartment upstairs, and I've been enjoying your practice sessions. Maya felt her cheeks warm. That was me. I'm sorry if it disturbed you. The woman waved away the apology. Disturbed? My dear, it's been the highlight of my day. I'm Ruth Johnson. I taught piano at the conservatory for 40 years before retiring. Maya Bennett, she replied automatically. Then the woman's words registered. Wait, you taught at Westmore Conservatory? Ruth nodded. Do you know it? Maya's heart raced. I was supposed to go there. I had a scholarship, but... She stopped, the old pain rising up unexpectedly. But life got in the way? Ruth suggested gently, something like that. Ruth came further into the cafe, moving with the careful steps of someone whose bones had grown fragile with age. May I? She asked, gesturing to the piano. Maya nodded, stepping aside. Ruth sat at the bench with perfect posture, her hands hovering over the keys for a moment before beginning to play. The melody that filled the cafe was the same Debussy piece Maya had been practicing, but transformed. Every note in its perfect place, the dynamics rising and falling like ocean waves, the tempo breathing like a living thing. When she finished, the final note seemed to linger in the air. That's how it's meant to sound, Ruth said, turning to Maya with a smile. But do you know what I heard when you played it this morning? Maya shook her head, feeling small and inadequate in the presence of such mastery. I heard someone who loves music, Ruth said simply. Technical skill can be taught, but that love, that's the rare gift. She rose from the bench. If you're interested, I still give lessons occasionally, just for the joy of it. I'm in apartment 3B. After Ruth left, Maya sat at the piano again, her mind spinning. The elderly woman had heard her playing, had been hearing her all along, and instead of being annoyed by the amateur next door, she had recognized something worth nurturing. Maya played the Debussy piece again, trying to remember how Ruth's hands had moved, how she had shaped the phrases. It still didn't sound like Ruth's version, but maybe that was okay. Maybe her version could be beautiful too, in its own way. The next morning, Maya stood outside apartment 3B, her hand raised to knock. She hesitated, suddenly unsure. What was she doing? She was 28 years old, a waitress with a half-finished business degree. Learning piano properly again wouldn't change her life. It wouldn't pay her bills or advance her career. But then, she remembered how it felt to lose herself in the music, how time seemed to stand still when she played. Wasn't that worth something too? She knocked. Ruth opened the door, unsurprised to see her. I was hoping you'd come, she said, stepping aside to let Maya in. The apartment was small but elegant, dominated by a baby grand piano that must have cost a fortune to move up the narrow stairs. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with Shito, music and leather-bound books. It smelled of tea and lavender, reminding Maya of her grandmother's house. I can't pay much, Maya said immediately. I'm just a waitress. Ruth smiled. Did I mention payment? Let's call this an exchange. You bring me coffee from downstairs twice a week, and I'll help you remember what your hands already know. For the next hour, Ruth worked with Maya on the Debussy piece, correcting her fingering, helping her shape the phrases. Ruth was a demanding teacher, stopping Maya whenever she rushed or blurred a passage, making her repeat sections until they flowed naturally. But there was kindness in her strictness, a genuine desire to help Maya succeed. You have a gift, Ruth said as their lesson ended. But gifts need nurturing. Practice at least an hour every day. Not just the pieces you already know, but scales and exercises too. Your technique needs rebuilding. Maya nodded, her mind already racing ahead to how she could fit practice time into her schedule. Thank you, she said, meaning it more deeply than Ruth could know. Same time on Thursday? Ruth asked. Maya smiled. I'll bring the coffee. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya settled into a new routine. Early mornings at the cafe piano, shifts waiting tables, evenings split between practice and her business classes, and twice weekly lessons with Ruth. She was exhausted but exhilarated, feeling more alive than she had in years. Bernie noticed the change in her. You're different, he said one slow afternoon as Maya refilled the sugar containers. Happier. Maya shrugged but couldn't help smiling. Maybe. Thought any more about those music nights? She had in fact been thinking about it quite a lot. Ruth had suggested that performing would help Maya overcome her nervousness, would give her playing a purpose beyond personal enjoyment. Maybe start small, Maya said cautiously. Just one song during a slow night. Bernie's face lit up. Really? How about next Friday? We could put up some flyers, let the regulars know. Panic fluttered in Maya's chest. No flyers, no announcements. If I do this, I want it to be casual. Just me playing while people have their coffee. Deal, Bernie said quickly before she could change her mind. One song, next Friday. As he walked away, Maya wondered what she'd gotten herself into. One song, she could do that, right? But which piece to choose? Something simple, she thought. Something that wouldn't show every flaw in her still recovering technique. That evening, as Maya practiced in her small apartment on the electronic keyboard she'd bought secondhand, she found herself returning to a piece she'd loved as a teenager. Yaruma's. River flows in you. It wasn't technically demanding, but it was beautiful, emotional without being sentimental. The kind of piece that might touch people, might remind them of something they'd forgotten. She played it over and over until her downstairs neighbor thumped on the ceiling in protest. By then, her fingers could find the notes without her conscious direction, the melody flowing as naturally as breathing. "I think I'm ready," she told Ruth at their next lesson, then played the piece for her teacher. When she finished, Ruth was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she finally said. "I think you are." Friday arrived too quickly. Maya had been both dreading and looking forward to this day all week. Her stomach had been in knots since she woke up, and her hands felt strangely cold and stiff as she got ready for work. "It's just one song," she told her reflection as she brushed her hair. 5 minutes tops. You can do anything for 5 minutes." But as she walked to the cafe, doubt crept in. What if she froze? What if her mind went blank and she couldn't remember the notes? What if people laughed or, worse, ignored her completely? Bernie greeted her with a knowing smile when she arrived. "Big day," he said, handing her a mug of coffee. Maya took it gratefully. "Please don't make a big deal about this. I'm nervous enough as it is." "No big deal," Bernie agreed, but his eyes were twinkling. "Just a little music during the dinner." "Crush. Happens all the time." Maya narrowed her eyes. "You promised. No announcements, no special treatment." "Cross my heart," Bernie said, making the gesture. "But I may have mentioned to a few regulars that there might be some live piano music tonight." "Bernie!" He raised his hands defensively. "What?" "People like knowing what to expect. Besides, you should have an audience who appreciates what you're doing." Maya couldn't argue with that, but the thought of people coming specifically to hear her play made her anxiety spike. She buried her nerves in work, moving through her morning shift on autopilot, taking orders and refilling coffee cups with mechanical efficiency. During her afternoon break, she slipped upstairs to Ruth's apartment for a final run-through of her piece. "You're too tense," Ruth observed as Maya's fingers stumbled over a passage she'd played perfectly the day before. "Your shoulders are up by your ears and you're barely breathing." Maya exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. "I'm just nervous about tonight," Ruth nodded understandingly. "That's natural. But remember, it's not about playing perfectly, it's about connecting with the music, with your audience, with yourself." "What if I mess up?" "Then you mess up," Ruth said simply. "The world won't end. You'll keep playing and most people won't even notice." She patted Maya's hand. "Music isn't math. It's not about getting all the right answers. It's about telling a story." Maya thought about Ruth's words as she returned to work for the evening shift. Telling a story. She could do that, couldn't she? The story of a river flowing, constant and ever-changing. As 6 o'clock approached, Maya noticed the cafe was unusually full for a Friday evening. All the regulars seemed to be there. Old Pete at his usual table, Mrs. Chen with her grandson, the college students with their laptops, even Diane and some of the other nurses. Had Bernie told everyone? And there, in the far corner, was Mr. Keller, the difficult lawyer who never seemed satisfied with anything. Maya's stomach tightened. Of all the people to witness her first performance in 10 years, why did he have to be here? Bernie approached as she was filling water glasses. "Thinking about backing out?" he asked quietly. Maya straightened her shoulders. "No." "Good. Because I think this place needs some music tonight." He glanced around at the full tables. "Maybe, around 7? Give people a chance to finish eating." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. 7 o'clock. 1 hour to go. The time passed both too quickly and too slowly. Maya continued her waitress duties, smiling and taking orders while her mind ran through the piece over and over. At 6:55, she excused herself to the bathroom, where she splashed cold water on her face and took several deep breaths. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "One song, 5 minutes." When she emerged, Bernie caught her eye and nodded toward the piano. It was time. Maya walked across the cafe, feeling every eye turn to follow her. The room wasn't silent, Conversations continued, forks clinked against plates, but there was an expectant quality to the ambient noise, as if the very air was holding its breath. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted its height, and placed her hands on the keys. They were steady now, her earlier trembling gone. In this moment, with the familiar ivory beneath her fingers, she knew exactly what to do. Maya began to play. The opening notes of River Flows in You filled the cafe, gentle and clear. Maya kept her eyes on her hands at first, focusing on each note, each phrase. But as the music flowed from her fingers, something shifted. She forgot about the audience, forgot about her nerves, forgot about everything except the story she was telling through the music. The melody rose and fell like water over stones, sometimes running swift and bright, sometimes deepening into pools of reflection. Maya felt herself sinking into the music, becoming part of it rather than merely its creator. This was why she had loved playing. This sense of connection to something larger than herself. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Maya looked up, suddenly aware again of the room full of people, of their eyes on her. Had she made a mistake? Had she embarrassed herself? Then someone began to clap. Old Pete, she realized, and suddenly the whole cafe was applauding. Mrs. Chen was beaming. The college students were whistling, and Bernie stood by the counter with a look of such pride that Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. Even Mr. Keller was clapping, a surprised expression on his usually stern face. Maya stood and gave a small awkward bow, her cheeks burning. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure if anyone could hear her over the applause. As she returned to work, taking her serving tray from behind the counter, customers stopped her to express their appreciation. "That was beautiful, dear," Mrs. Chen said, patting her hand. "Will you play again next week? You've been holding out on us," one of the college students teased. "All this time we thought you were just good at remembering our coffee orders." Maya smiled and thanked them, still floating, on the high of performance. She had done it, played in public again after all these years, and nothing terrible had happened. In fact, something wonderful had happened. For 5 minutes she had created beauty that touched other people's lives. As the evening wore on, the cafe gradually emptied. By closing time, only one customer remained, Mr. Keller, still working, on legal briefs at his corner table. Maya approached hesitantly. "We're closing soon," she said. "Can I get you anything else?" Mr. Keller looked up, his expression unreadable. "No, thank you." He gathered his papers, then paused. "You play very well." Coming from him, the simple statement felt like high praise. "Thank you," Maya said, surprised. "My daughter is learning piano," he continued, not meeting her eyes. "She gets frustrated easily, wants to quit when it gets hard." Maya nodded, unsure where this was going. "I tell her that anything worth doing takes work," Mr. Keller said. "But sometimes I think she needs to see someone who's pushed through that stage, who finds joy in it." He hesitated. "Does the cafe owner plan to have you play regularly?" "We haven't really discussed it," Maya said, though Bernie had been dropping hints all evening about making it a weekly event. "Well, if you do," Mr. Keller cleared his throat, "I might bring her sometime, if that would be all right." Maya smiled, seeing the difficult lawyer in a new light. "I'd like that." After he left, Maya joined Bernie at the counter, where he was tallying the day's receipts. "So," he said, trying and failing to sound casual, "how do you feel about doing this again? Maybe make it a regular thing on Fridays?" Maya pretended to consider. "I don't know. There was a lot of pressure." Bernie's face fell. "Right, of course, no pressure, it was just an idea." "But," Maya continued, unable to keep up the pretense at his crestfallen expression, "I think I could handle it. Maybe even 2 or 3 songs, next time." Bernie's smile returned. "Yeah, that would be great, kid. Really great." As they finished closing up, Bernie grew uncharacteristically quiet. "You know," he finally said, "Carol would have loved hearing you play tonight." The mention of his late wife caught Maya off guard. Bernie rarely spoke of her. Really? Bernie nodded, his eyes far away. She always said this place needed music, said it wasn't just about feeding people's bodies but their souls too. He shook his head, coming back to the present. Anyway, you did good tonight. Real good. His words stayed with Maya as she walked home through the quiet streets. Feeding people's souls. Was that what she had done tonight? The thought filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. When she reached her apartment building, she found Ruth waiting in the lobby, a small gift bag in her hands. "I thought I might miss you," the older woman said. "I wanted to congratulate you on your performance." "You came?" Maya asked, surprised. Ruth smiled. "Of course. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. You played beautifully, much better than in our lesson this afternoon. You found the heart of the music tonight." "Thank you," Maya said, touched by her teacher's praise. "That means a lot coming from you." Ruth handed her the gift bag. Just a small token to commemorate the occasion. Inside was a leather-bound notebook with blank sheet music paper. "For your compositions," Ruth explained. "I've heard you experimenting sometimes during practice. You have ideas worth preserving." Maya stared at the notebook, then at her teacher. "I don't know what to say." "Say, you'll keep playing," Ruth said simply. "Say you'll remember that music isn't just something you do, it's part of who you are." The next morning, Maya arrived at the cafe to find a handwritten sign in the window. Live piano music every Friday night. Underneath, in smaller letters, featuring Maya Bennett. Bernie was already inside, preparing the morning coffee. "Too much?" he asked when he saw her staring at the sign. Maya thought about the applause, about Mr. Keller's daughter, about Ruth's gift. She thought about the feeling of the music flowing through her, connecting her to something larger than herself. "No," she said, smiling. "It's just right." She tied on her apron and began her waitress duties, but everything felt different now. The cafe wasn't just where she worked anymore, it was where she had found herself again. And the piano in the corner wasn't just furniture, it was a doorway to possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. As she refilled old Pete's coffee cup, he nodded toward the sign in the window. "Looking forward to next Friday," he said. "Any requests?" Maya laughed. "Let me get through today first." But already in the back of her mind, she was planning what she would play next week and the week after that. Pieces that would tell stories, that would touch hearts, that would feed souls. She was still a waitress. But now, she was something. More as well. 6 months had passed since Maya's first performance at Cafe Allegro. Friday nights were now standing room only, with people arriving early to secure tables. What had started as one nervous song had grown into hour-long sets, a mixture of classical pieces and contemporary songs that Maya arranged herself. She still waited tables during the day, but everyone now knew her as the piano girl. "We're going to need a bigger cafe," Bernie joked one Friday evening as he squeezed between crowded tables. Maya laughed as she tied her apron, no longer using it to serve food, but wearing it as a habit before performances. Maybe just a bigger piano. The old upright, while lovingly maintained, had its limitations. Some of the keys stuck occasionally, and the pedals needed more pressure than they should. "Working on it," Bernie said with a wink, then disappeared into the kitchen before she could question him. Maya had long since stopped getting nervous before playing. The piano bench felt more like home than anywhere else, and the faces in the crowd were now familiar, supporters rather than judges. Even Mr. Keller had become a regular, often bringing his daughter Lily, whose own piano playing was improving with weekly lessons from Ruth. Tonight's crowd was different, though. Among the regulars, Maya spotted several unfamiliar faces, including a sharply dressed woman who sat alone at a corner table, watching Maya with particular interest as she prepared to play. "Someone new in the third row," Ruth murmured as she took her usual seat near the piano. At 83, Ruth rarely missed Maya's performances, claiming they were the highlight of her week. "I noticed," Maya whispered back. "She looks important." Ruth smiled mysteriously. "Perhaps she is. Play your best tonight." Maya shook her head at her teacher's cryptic comment and focused on her music. Tonight's program included several of her own compositions, pieces she'd written in the leather-bound notebook Ruth had given her. She'd been hesitant to play her own work at first, but the cafe audience had embraced these personal pieces with surprising enthusiasm. As she played, Maya found herself glancing occasionally at the stranger. The woman listened with complete attention, her eyes sometimes closed, her head nodding slightly with the rhythm. When Maya finished her first set, the applause was enthusiastic as always, but the woman didn't join in. Instead, she scribbled something in a small notebook. During the break, as Maya sipped water at the counter, Bernie sidled up beside her. "So that woman in the corner asked about you," he said casually. "Wanted to know if you have recordings or if you perform anywhere else." Maya nearly choked on her water. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're our hidden gem, that you've had classical training but took a detour, and that you write your own stuff now." Bernie's eyes twinkled. "Also might have mentioned you're not signed to any label." "Bernie," Maya hissed. "You make it sound like I'm looking for a record deal or something." Bernie shrugged. "Aren't you? Even a little bit?" The question caught Maya off guard. Was she? 6 months ago, the idea would have seemed ridiculous. But now, with her confidence growing and her skills sharper than they'd ever been, she sometimes let herself wonder what else might be possible. Before she could answer, the woman approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polished and professional. "Are you Maya Bennett?" Maya nodded, suddenly nervous again. "I'm Eliza Winters, from Horizon Records." She held out a business card. "I happened to be in town visiting family and heard about this place from my cousin. I'm very glad I came." Maya took the card automatically, staring at the embossed logo of a major recording label. "Your playing is extraordinary," Eliza continued. "Technically impressive, but more importantly, it has heart. And your original compositions show real promise. I'd love to talk with you about the possibility of recording some of your work." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Maya glanced at Bernie, who was grinning like he'd just won the lottery, then back at Eliza. Thank you, but I'm just a cafe pianist," she stammered. Eliza smiled. Glenn Gould was just a pianist too until someone recognized his talent. "Look, I'm not offering a contract on the spot, but I would like to schedule a proper meeting maybe next week to discuss possibilities." "She'd love to." Bernie cut in before Maya could respond. "She's off on Mondays and Tuesdays." Eliza nodded. "Perfect. Monday at 2 p.m., there's a nice tea shop down the street we could meet at." After they exchanged contact information and Eliza returned to her table, Maya turned to Bernie, her heart racing. "Did that really just happen?" "Told you she was important," Ruth said, appearing beside them with a satisfied smile. "And it's about time someone from the industry noticed what we've all known for months." "You knew she was coming?" Maya asked, suspicion dawning. Ruth looked innocently at the ceiling. "I might have sent a few recordings to some old contacts. One never knows what might come of such things." "You recorded me?" "When?" "Every Friday for the past month," Ruth admitted. "My nephew helped me set up a good microphone. I hope you're not angry, dear." Maya wasn't sure what she felt. Shocked, certainly. Grateful, maybe. Terrified, definitely. "What if she wants me to quit my job? Move to New York or something?" Bernie placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then you'll have a decision to make. But it's a good problem to have, kid." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Maya played her second set on autopilot, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. After closing, she found herself unable to go home, too wired to sleep. Instead, she sat at the piano in the darkened cafe, her fingers trailing absently over the keys. "Can't sleep?" Bernie's voice came from the doorway. Maya jumped. "I thought you'd gone home." "Paperwork," he said, holding up a folder. "Exciting stuff." He sat on a nearby chair. "Want to talk about it?" Maya sighed. "I don't know what to say. This afternoon I was a waitress who plays piano on Fridays. Now I'm potentially what? A A recording artist? It doesn't seem real. Seems pretty real to me, Bernie said. I always knew you were something special from that first night I heard you play. But what if I'm not ready? What if I fail? Bernie considered this. What if you fly? Look, Maya, life doesn't give us many clean shots at our dreams. Sometimes we have to take the messy ones, the ones that come after detours and disappointments. He hesitated. You know, Carol was a singer before we opened this place. Had a beautiful voice, sang with a jazz band on weekends. I didn't know that, Maya said softly. She gave it up to run the cafe with me. Said she was making a practical choice. Bernie's eyes grew distant. After she got sick, she told me her biggest regret was not seeing how far her music could have taken her. He focused on Maya again. I don't want that for you. The weight of his words settled around her. I'm scared, she admitted. Good, Bernie said. Means it matters. Monday arrived with surprising speed. Maya dressed carefully for her meeting, with Eliza settling on a simple blue dress that Ruth had assured her was perfect, professional but not trying too hard. The tea shop was quiet in the mid-afternoon lull. Eliza was already there, laptop open and several folders on the table. Maya, thank you for coming, she said, standing to greet her. I've been listening to the recordings Ruth sent, and I'm even more impressed. Thank you, Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. I still can't believe you're interested in my playing. Eliza smiled. Well, believe it. We're looking for artists with authentic voices, and yours comes through clearly in your compositions. She opened one of the folders. I've drafted a potential plan for an EP to start. 6 tracks. A mixture of your original pieces and perhaps some classical interpretations. We'd record here in town to begin with, then see how the market responds. As Eliza continued outlining possibilities, studio time, distribution channels, potential performance opportunities, Maya felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was really happening. Of course, Eliza added, we'd need you full-time for the recording process, at least for a few months. Would that be a problem with your current job? The question brought Maya up short. Leave the cafe? Stop waiting tables? Stop seeing the regulars every day? Stop being part of their lives? I would need to discuss it with Bernie, she said carefully. The cafe is. It's more than just a job to me. Eliza nodded understandingly. Take your time. This is a big decision. But I should tell you, Maya, talent like yours doesn't come along often. You have a gift that deserves to be shared. Maya walked back to the cafe slowly, her mind full. When she arrived, Bernie was behind the counter and Ruth was sitting at her usual table. They both looked up expectantly. How did it go? Ruth asked. Maya sat down, still processing. She wants to record an EP. My compositions, some classical pieces, she says. Maya took a deep breath. She says I have a gift that deserves to be shared. Bernie beamed. She's right about that. But I'd have to leave the cafe, at least for a while. Maya looked around at the familiar space that had become her second home. I don't know if I can do that. Ruth reached across the table to take her hand. My dear, the cafe will always be here. But opportunities like this are rare. What if I mess it up? What if no one likes my music outside of this place? Then you'll come back and play for people who do, Bernie said simply. No one can take your music away from you, Maya. Not anymore. Maya nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. He was right. No matter what happened with Eliza and the record label, she had already found what she'd been missing for so long. Her voice, her passion, her courage to share it with others. A week later, Maya signed her first recording contract. The cafe hosted a celebration with all the regulars raising glasses to her success. Old Pete proposed a toast, his voice gruff with emotion. To Maya, who was just a waitress until she pressed the piano and then became who she was always meant to be. The following month, as recording began, Maya kept her promise to Bernie. She still played at the cafe every Friday night. And when her EP was released, featuring a cover photo of Maya at the old upright piano in Cafe Allegro, the first copy went to Bernie, the second to Ruth. The cafe changed too. Bernie used some of the money from Maya's success. She had insisted on making him a partner in her publishing to buy a new piano, a beautiful baby grand that gleamed in the corner where the old upright had stood. But he kept the old piano too, moving it to a smaller corner. For beginners, he explained, figure this place should always have room for someone who's just starting to find their way. On her rare free evenings, Maya sometimes returned to Café Allegro, not to perform, but to watch new talent at open mic nights. Sometimes she even waited tables, taking orders and refilling coffee cups, reminding herself of where she'd started and how far she'd come. And sometimes, when the cafe was empty and the night was quiet, she would sit at the old upright piano, the one that had changed her life, and play. Not for an audience or for a recording, but simply for the joy of pressing the keys and letting the music flow through her fingers and into the world. She had been just a waitress until she pressed the piano. Now she was both more and less than that label. She was simply Maya, a woman who had found her way back to herself through music, one note at a time.